A widowed rancher buys an abandoned ranch and discovers two Apache women living there. John McAllister had always loved the wide-open spaces of Arizona. Even as a young boy, he felt at home under the endless sky, with the wind brushing across the dry grass and the mountains standing like silent guardians in the distance. But life had a way of changing even the most familiar landscapes. When his wife passed away suddenly, John felt the ground beneath him shift. The house he had shared with her, filled with memories of laughter and quiet evenings, now seemed hollow. Each room reminded him of what he had lost, and each corner whispered a question he could not answer. How would he move on? Grief is a heavy companion, and for months, John carried it with him everywhere he went. The town where he and his wife had lived was too small to hide from memories. Friends tried to offer comfort, but their words often felt like distant echoes against the storm of his sorrow. One evening, while staring at a photograph of his late wife, John realized he could not stay. He needed a change, a fresh start, a place where he could breathe again without constantly being reminded of the past. The idea came to him like a spark in the darkness, an abandoned ranch on the outskirts of the state. It was old, neglected, and far from the small town where he had spent most of his life. The locals spoke of it in whispers. Some said it was haunted, others said it was cursed. For John, these warnings were not deterrents but invitations. If he could restore that land, if he could make it his own, perhaps he could restore a piece of himself along with it. Arrangements were made quickly. John sold the house in town, packed what few belongings he had left, and set out toward the abandoned ranch. As he drove down the dusty roads, the landscape slowly transformed. Rolling hills gave way to jagged rock formations, and the dry, golden grass stretched endlessly in all directions. It felt as though he were leaving not just a town, but a life that no longer fit him. Every mile took him further from sorrow and closer to something unknown, something that might help him heal. The ranch appeared as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. From a distance, it looked more like a memory than a place. A weathered house with peeling paint, fences lying in ruin, and a barn that seemed to sag under its own weight. John stepped out of his truck and took a deep breath. The air smelled of earth, sage, and something wild he could not name. He felt a thrill, an excitement that had been missing for months. For the first time since his wife had died, he felt the stirrings of hope. Walking across the overgrown yard, John noticed the details that told the story of abandonment. The porch boards were warped, the windows coated with layers of dust, and the front door hung slightly off its hinges. Yet beneath the decay, he could see the bones of the ranch, sturdy beams, solid stone foundations, and wide-open spaces that seemed full of promise. John imagined what it would be like to fix it, to breathe life into the old house and fields again. He could almost hear the sound of hooves in the barn, the low murmur of cattle, and the wind through the trees. That night, as he settled into a small bedroom upstairs, the silence of the ranch pressed against him. It was a deep, complete silence, the kind that made every creak and groan of the old house echo through the empty halls. John lay awake, listening to the wind whistling through gaps in the windows and the distant call of a coyote. Then he heard it, a faint rustling like someone moving carefully outside. His heart jumped. Perhaps it was just the wind. Perhaps it was a stray animal, but deep down, John sensed something else. The ranch was not entirely empty, and this thought both unsettled and intrigued him. The next morning, John rose with the first light of dawn. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the world seemed to hold its breath. He decided to explore the property fully, eager to understand the land he had bought. The barn was the first stop. Its doors creaked loudly as he pushed them open, revealing the shadows of old equipment, broken tools, and piles of hay long past their prime. As he walked through the dust-filled air, he noticed footprints, small, careful, and fresh. John froze, staring at the ground. They were not his own. Someone had been here recently. Curiosity overcame caution. John followed the tracks, moving past the barn and into the back fields. There, in a sheltered area behind a cluster of rocks and low trees, he saw signs of habitation. There was a small fire pit, neatly arranged stones, and the faint smell of smoke lingering in the air. He realized, with a mixture of surprise and apprehension, that someone was living on the ranch, someone who had chosen to remain hidden. For hours, John walked the property, noticing more clues. Handmade pottery lay near the fire pit, and there were carefully arranged bundles of firewood. A part of the old ranch house, long unused, had been converted into a small shelter. Whoever was here had made a home out of what others had abandoned. John felt a strange combination of emotions: anger that someone had taken residence on his land, admiration for their resourcefulness, and a growing curiosity about who they were and why they were here. As the sun climbed higher, John returned to the house, his mind racing. He had come here to find peace, to rebuild his life, and now he realized he was not alone. Yet instead of feeling threatened, he felt a spark of purpose. Perhaps this discovery was not an obstacle but an opportunity. The ranch was more than just property. It was a living, breathing place with its own secrets and stories. And maybe, just maybe, it was a place where John could heal by connecting with these new inhabitants, people who had also found themselves at a crossroads in life. That evening, John lit a small fire in the fireplace, trying to shake off the tension of the day. The sky outside was deepening into shades of purple and blue, and the stars began to appear one by one. He thought about the ranch, about the footprints, about the hidden shelter behind the trees. Sleep came slowly, filled with dreams of unknown faces and whispered voices, of wind through broken fences and the laughter of children who might have once played on this land. John knew that his life had changed forever. The abandoned ranch was no longer empty, and neither was his heart. Something, or someone, was waiting for him here, and he could not yet know whether that presence would bring joy, challenge, or both. By the end of the first week, John began to settle into a rhythm. He cleaned the house as best he could, patched broken boards, and cleared a path to the barn. Each day he discovered more traces of the hidden inhabitants: an abandoned basket, a worn blanket, footprints that led into the hills. He realized that the ranch had stories embedded in every stone and every tree, and he felt a deep respect for the resilience of whoever had lived here before him. John McAllister, widowed and weary, had come to this ranch seeking a fresh start. What he found instead was a mystery, a challenge, and perhaps a chance at connection. The abandoned ranch, full of secrets and whispers, had welcomed him, not just as an owner but as someone who might share in its story. And for the first time in many months, John felt that flicker of hope that life, even after loss, could still hold surprises worth embracing. The morning sun rose over the ranch with a golden glow, spilling light across the dry grass and the rugged mountains in the distance. John McAllister had barely slept the night before. Thoughts of the footprints, the hidden fire pit, and the faint smell of smoke lingered in his mind. He could no longer ignore the possibility that someone had been living on his ranch. Curiosity mixed with caution, and he resolved to find out who it was. He grabbed his hat and stepped outside, the air crisp and cool against his skin. The ranch stretched before him, quiet and still except for the occasional sound of birds calling in the distance. As he walked toward the back of the property, he remembered the shelter he had noticed near the rocks. Each step he took seemed to echo in the vast emptiness, the crunch of dry grass under his boots sounding louder than it should. When John reached the hidden area, he froze. There in the soft morning light he saw them. Two women, moving carefully between the rocks and the trees, their dark hair tied back, their faces focused and alert. They were carrying water in clay jugs and arranging small bundles of firewood near the fire pit. Both women wore simple, handmade clothing practical for life on the land. They did not notice him at first, and he stayed behind the rocks, unsure how to approach. John's heart raced. He had expected traces of people, footprints, perhaps a shelter, but not actual humans. For a moment he considered turning around, leaving them in peace. But something deeper pushed him forward. He had seen enough in his own life to understand that some people, some circumstances, were born of necessity, not choice. Whoever they were here for a reason, and he wanted to understand. Stepping cautiously into view, John cleared his throat. "Hello." His voice sounded strange even to him, too loud in the quiet morning. The women froze. One of them, slightly taller, turned quickly, eyes widening in surprise. The other stepped back instinctively, placing a hand near her chest as if to protect herself. Who are you?" the taller woman asked, her voice calm but wary. Her accent was soft, melodic, carrying the tones of the land they called home. "My name is John McAllister," he said slowly. I just bought this ranch. I didn't know anyone was living here." He kept his hands raised slightly, trying to show he meant no harm. "I don't want to frighten you, I just want to understand." The taller woman's eyes studied him carefully. She glanced at the younger woman, who nodded slightly, and then she stepped forward cautiously. We live here," she said quietly. "We didn't mean any trouble. We just needed a place to stay." John nodded slowly, trying to absorb the situation. "I can see that, and I don't want to make things harder for you, but this is my property. I need to know, why are you here?" There was a pause. The taller woman, Maria, exchanged a glance with the younger one, Ilana. "We left the reservation," Maria began softly. "It wasn't safe for us anymore. We had no one else, and this land, it was empty, so we stayed." Her voice carried a mixture of sadness and pride, a strength born of survival. John felt a lump in his throat. He understood loss. He understood loneliness. And now he understood that the ranch was no longer just a place for him to heal. It was also a refuge for these women. "I see," he said gently. "You didn't want to cause trouble. I just want to make sure we can live here without harming each other." Ilana stepped forward, her eyes cautious but curious. "Can we stay just a little longer? We don't have anywhere else to go." John studied them for a moment. They were clearly resourceful, living in such conditions without complaint. Their resilience reminded him of his own struggle to survive after his wife's death. He took a deep breath and nodded. "For now, yes. I won't ask you to leave immediately, but we need to find a way to live here together safely." A flicker of relief crossed their faces, and for the first time John felt a small connection forming. It was fragile, like a seed barely breaking through the soil, but it was there. They began to talk cautiously, sharing details about their lives. Maria explained that they were sisters, though not by blood, bound together by circumstance and a shared struggle. Ilana had been living with Maria for several years, and together they had learned to survive in the harsh desert, using knowledge passed down from their families. John listened intently, fascinated by their resilience and the simplicity of their lives. They had found ways to collect water, hunt small game, and cultivate small patches of edible plants. They had avoided local towns for fear of being forced to leave or judged for their choices. Their lives were not easy, but they were full of purpose and careful balance. Over the next few days, John began to interact more with Maria and Ilana. He would bring food from town, small comforts like blankets and extra water, and in return they showed him hidden springs on the property, patches of fertile soil, and old paths through the hills. Slowly, a mutual respect grew. John saw their strength and they saw his determination. Both sides understood that cooperation, not conflict, would make their lives better. Despite the initial wariness, there were moments of laughter. John, unused to such simplicity, fumbled with carrying water and trying to cook on their small fire. Ilana couldn't help but laugh at his clumsiness, and even Maria allowed herself a quiet smile. For a few hours each day, the ranch became a place of normalcy, where grief and survival coexisted with small joys. John also began to notice the women's connection to the land in ways he had never understood. Maria could tell which plants were safe to eat, which herbs could heal, and where the wildlife would appear. Ilana had a keen sense of the weather, predicting storms and finding shelter before danger struck. Their knowledge impressed him and humbled him at the same time. He realized that he had much to learn, not only about surviving in this land, but also about seeing it through their eyes. Yet, life on the ranch was not without challenges. Neighbors and local authorities soon began to notice John's unusual arrangement. Some were curious, others suspicious. John faced questions about why two women were living on his land without formal permission or explanation. At first, he worried about what they might think or say, but he knew he could not abandon Maria and Ilana. They had nowhere else to go, and he had made a promise, even if only in his mind, to protect them. One evening, a strong desert wind blew across the ranch. The dust swirled, rattling the windows of the old house. John, Maria, and Ilana worked together to secure the smaller shelter and gather firewood before night fell. It was grueling work, but it cemented their bond. Side by side, they faced the harsh reality of the land, learning to trust each other's instincts and judgments. By the time the sun set, the three of them were tired but triumphant. For the first time, John felt a sense of belonging. He was no longer alone in the world, and the ranch, once empty and silent, was beginning to feel alive. At night, sitting around the fire, they shared stories. Maria spoke of her childhood on the reservation, of family traditions, and of the challenges that had forced her to leave. Ilana spoke of her hopes, dreams, and fears. John shared memories of his wife, not to dwell in sorrow, but to explain why he had come here, to find a new life. The three of them listened to each other with quiet respect, learning the rhythms of a life that was now shared, even if only partially. In those moments, the ranch transformed in his eyes. It was no longer just land, fences, or a house. It was a place of connection, a home where lives intersected unexpectedly but meaningfully. John realized that perhaps the ranch had been waiting for this moment all along, waiting to bring together people who needed each other in ways they did not yet understand. Days turned into weeks, and the arrangement solidified. Maria and Ilana helped with the ranch work, and John provided supplies and guidance where he could. The property began to show signs of life, fences repaired, fields cleared, and small gardens planted. Each day, John felt more at peace. The grief that had weighed so heavily on him began to ease, replaced by a sense of purpose. He was no longer just a man trying to escape his past. He was part of something living, something growing. By the end of that first month, John understood that this discovery, finding Maria and Ilana, was more than a surprise. It was a turning point. The abandoned ranch had not only brought him a new beginning, but it also brought him companions who taught him resilience, patience, and the quiet strength of life lived simply. Together, they began to build a future, one day at a time, on the land that had once been silent but now hummed with the promise of life, trust, and unexpected friendship. And so, the ranch that John had bought to escape sorrow became something entirely new, a place of discovery, connection, and hope, where the past was remembered, but the future waited patiently to be written. The days on the ranch grew warmer as spring slowly gave way to the heat of early summer. John McAllister had settled into a routine, waking with the sun, tending to the fields, repairing fences, and checking on the few cattle that had survived from the previous owner. Maria and Ilana moved seamlessly alongside him, their presence no longer a surprise but a quiet rhythm in his life. What had begun as cautious coexistence had begun to grow into something more, an uneasy alliance turning slowly into respect and trust. It was during one of these early mornings that John realized how much he had learned from the women. Maria taught him to identify plants that could be eaten or used for medicine, showing him which leaves would soothe a burn or calm a fever. Alana taught him to read the weather, predicting sudden desert storms long before dark clouds appeared. John had spent years on the ranch, yet these lessons felt new, practical, and alive. The land seemed to open itself to him in ways it hadn't before. Despite the growing trust, there were still moments of tension. John was a man used to order and rules, and the women had their own ways, careful, subtle, and sometimes mysterious. Maria would disappear into the hills for hours, returning with water or firewood without explanation. Alana would wander the fields at dawn, humming softly, observing the wildlife and tracking their movements. At first, John worried, wondering if they would ever accept his authority as the landowner. But slowly, he began to understand that their methods were not rebellious. They were a deep connection to the land that he had overlooked. One afternoon, as John worked to repair a broken fence along the northern edge of the property, he noticed Maria and Alana moving in the distance. They carried a bundle of brush and small logs toward the barn. Their movements were careful, deliberate, almost ritualistic. John called out, "Do you want help?" Maria shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, thank you. This is something we can manage, but you can watch. We are teaching you patience." John laughed softly. "I could use all the lessons I can get." As the weeks passed, small routines formed. They shared meals around a fire, sometimes silent, sometimes filled with conversation. John began to share stories of his late wife, not in sorrow, but to explain who he was and why he had come to the ranch. Maria and Alana, in turn, shared stories of their childhoods, the traditions of their families, and the ways they had survived when the world outside seemed unkind. The conversations were slow and careful at first, but over time they became more open, more honest. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, John and Maria sat on the porch of the old house, watching Alana gather herbs in the yard. Maria spoke softly. "You know, John, this land has a memory. It remembers who walks upon it, who cares for it. It can forgive, but it also teaches." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. He had felt that memory himself, sensing it in the way the wind moved through the trees, in the way the animals appeared when they were least expected, in the quiet moments when the ranch seemed almost alive. "I think I'm beginning to understand," he said. Their bond deepened not only through conversation but through shared work. Storms came suddenly in the desert, and the three of them would scramble to protect the crops, secure the shelter, and care for the animals. Wildfires threatened the fields at times, forcing long hours of labor to dig fire breaks and carry water. Each challenge strengthened their reliance on one another. John began to see the women not as guests or dependents, but as partners, equals in survival and in care for the land. One afternoon, a stranger approached the ranch. He was a local rancher, curious about the new owner who had appeared with two mysterious women living on his property. He asked questions politely, but his tone carried suspicion. "I hear you've got company out here," he said, glancing at Maria and Alana who had emerged from the barn. John straightened, placing himself slightly in front of them. "Yes, I do. They are staying with me. We're taking care of this land together." The man frowned but nodded slowly. "Well, just be careful, people talk." John watched the man leave and then turned to the women. "People might not understand what we're doing here," he said. Maria smiled, her eyes calm. "We are not here to please them. We are here to live." Alana added softly, "And the land accepts us. That is enough." It was a lesson John carried with him every day. He began to shed the worry about what others thought and focused on the life they were building together. The ranch became more than property. It was a living home, shaped by their hands and their care. Each repaired fence, each new plant, each small fire carefully tended became a symbol of their shared effort. As the months passed, the trust between them blossomed into something almost familial. Maria taught John traditional techniques of food preservation, showing him how to dry herbs, smoke meat, and store water for the harshest months. Alana taught him to observe the night sky, reading the stars to predict weather and guide their journeys through the hills. John, in return, shared his experience with ranching, teaching them to handle cattle, mend fences, and manage crops. The exchange of knowledge became a bridge between their worlds, a bond that grew stronger with each passing day. Yet, challenges remained. John sometimes wrestled with his grief, the memories of his late wife surfacing unexpectedly. On certain nights, when the ranch was quiet and the wind rustled through the trees, he would sit alone and feel the ache of loss. Maria and Alana never intruded but left small tokens of care, a warm blanket, a prepared meal, or a soft, encouraging word. Their presence, gentle and steady, reminded him that he was not alone and that healing did not have to be hurried. One particularly harsh week brought heavy rains and sudden flooding in the lower fields. The creek that ran nearby overflowed, threatening to wash away newly planted crops. John, Maria, and Alana worked tirelessly to redirect the water, carrying sandbags and building barriers. By the end of the day, soaked and exhausted, they sat together under the shelter of the barn, sharing quiet laughter and small victories. The experience, though grueling, cemented their connection. Each recognized the strength in the other, the resilience born not only of necessity but of trust and cooperation. By midsummer, the ranch was transforming. The house, once empty and silent, now had signs of life: flowers in the window boxes, fresh-smelling herbs drying on hooks, and a small vegetable garden growing beside the barn. The once abandoned fields showed the promise of green shoots, nourished by careful hands. The ranch was no longer just John's property. It was a shared home, a place where life had returned and flourished. One evening, as the sun set in brilliant shades of orange and purple, John and the women sat together on the porch, looking over the land. Maria spoke quietly, almost to herself. "This place, it teaches patience, it teaches care, and it teaches us that life is never wasted, even when it seems broken." Alana nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "We have survived because we worked together. Because we listened, because we cared for each other and this land." John felt a warmth in his chest. "And I've learned that I don't have to face the world alone," he said. "Even after loss, even after sorrow, there is still hope." It was a quiet understanding, one that did not require words. The three of them, so different in their experiences and histories, had formed a bond stronger than any challenge the land could throw at them. The ranch, once abandoned and silent, had become a living testament to resilience, trust, and the power of human connection. As the stars appeared in the night sky, John reflected on the journey that had brought him here. He had arrived seeking escape from grief, seeking a fresh start, and instead had discovered companionship, wisdom, and a renewed sense of purpose. Maria and Alana, with their quiet strength and deep knowledge of the land, had become more than allies. They had become family. And so the ranch continued to thrive. The days passed with work and learning, with laughter and quiet reflection. The challenges were many, but each was met together, each obstacle an opportunity to grow closer. John understood, finally, that life's greatest lessons often came from unexpected places, and that healing, though slow, could flourish when shared with those who understand and care. The abandoned ranch, once a symbol of isolation and loss, had become a sanctuary, not only for John but for Maria and Alana as well. Together, they faced the future with courage, trust, and a quiet joy that only comes from knowing you belong. No matter how broken or unexpected the journey may have been, summer was at its peak, and the Arizona sun beat down on the ranch with relentless intensity. The land that John McAllister, Maria, and Alana cared for had begun to thrive, but with the growth came new challenges. The weather was unpredictable, and the ranch's isolation sometimes made even small problems feel urgent. One morning, John woke to find that a section of the fence on the northern pasture had collapsed during the night. Several cattle had wandered closer to the hills, and he could see their dark shapes moving slowly in the distance. He called to Maria and Ilana, who were already preparing water for the animals. "We have a problem," he said, pointing toward the broken fence. Maria's expression was calm as always, while Ilana tightened her braid and nodded. Without hesitation, the three of them ran toward the pasture, gathering rope, planks, and tools. Working side by side, they repaired the fence, moving efficiently and quietly, their teamwork a testament to how much they had learned from each other. The incident reminded John that life on the ranch was never easy, and that survival depended on vigilance and cooperation. He realized that, though he had grown stronger and more capable, he was still learning from Maria and Ilana every day. They taught him not only about the land but also about resilience, patience, and the strength of quiet determination. One afternoon, a storm rolled in from the west. Dark clouds gathered quickly, and the wind began to howl through the hills. The three of them sprang into action, securing loose equipment, covering the newly planted crops with tarps and bringing the animals into the barn. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drenching them in minutes. The sound of water pounding the roof and the wind rattling the windows was deafening, but John, Maria, and Ilana worked together without hesitation. As they huddled in the barn for a break, catching their breath, Maria spoke quietly. "The land can be harsh, but it teaches us strength. We must respect it, but we must also act when needed." Ilana added, "We have survived storms before. This one will not defeat us either." John nodded, feeling a deep respect for their calm, unwavering confidence. Their experience and knowledge had saved both the ranch and the animals many times before, and he had come to trust their instincts completely. Even with these challenges, there were moments of quiet joy. During the evenings, the three of them would sit on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the hills. Sometimes they spoke, other times they simply sat in comfortable silence, listening to the sounds of the desert at night, the distant call of a coyote, the rustle of leaves in the wind, the faint murmurs of the creek that ran through the property. John realized that these moments were just as important as the work. They were a time to reflect, to feel peace, and to appreciate the life they were building together. The bond between John, Maria, and Ilana deepened in ways he had not anticipated. They shared meals, laughter, and small victories, and their trust in one another grew steadily. John began to understand that family could take many forms, not only those bound by blood. Maria and Ilana, with their quiet strength and unyielding spirit, had become his family in a way he had never expected. Yet, life on the ranch was not without outside challenges. Local neighbors began to notice John's unusual arrangement and whispered about the two women living on his property. Some were curious, others suspicious. John faced questions about why they were there and whether he was breaking any laws. At first, he worried, but he quickly realized that the opinions of outsiders were less important than the well-being of the women and the ranch. Maria and Ilana had nowhere else to go, and he had made a commitment to protect them. One particularly dry week brought new difficulties. The heat was oppressive, and water became scarce. The creek that had once provided a reliable source of water had slowed to a trickle, and the plants in the garden began to wilt. John, Maria, and Ilana worked tirelessly, digging a small well and using creative methods to conserve water. The work was exhausting, but the three of them faced it together. Each problem strengthened their bond and taught them new ways to survive in the harsh environment. During one of these long, hot days, John took a moment to reflect. He thought about his life before the ranch, the house in town, his wife, and the loneliness that had followed her passing. He realized that the ranch, despite its challenges, had given him a new purpose. The women had taught him more than just survival skills. They had taught him patience, resilience, and the importance of human connection. He knew that he was not just rebuilding the ranch, he was rebuilding himself. As the days passed, the trio faced additional challenges that tested their strength and unity. One evening, while checking on the cattle, John noticed signs of a coyote den nearby. The predators had begun to approach the livestock, and if left unchecked, they could cause serious harm. Maria and Alana devised a plan to protect the animals using non-lethal methods, setting up barriers and carefully monitoring the area. John admired their ingenuity and calm approach, realizing that their knowledge of the land was invaluable. The challenges also included moments of tension among themselves. Living closely in such isolation sometimes led to disagreements about the best way to handle work, the proper care for the animals, or how to plan for the future. However, each disagreement was handled with respect and understanding. John learned to listen more and assert less, while Maria and Alana adapted to his perspective when necessary. Through these challenges, they discovered that cooperation and compromise were essential, not only for survival but for maintaining trust and harmony. Amid the hard work and occasional tension, there were signs of joy and hope. The ranch began to flourish in ways none of them had anticipated. The garden grew, producing fresh vegetables and herbs. The animals thrived under careful care. Even small wildlife returned to the land, a sign that the environment was healing along with the people who tended it. John, Maria, and Alana celebrated each success, sharing meals and laughter, and taking pride in the fruits of their labor. One evening, after a particularly long day of work, John and the women sat together by the fire outside the house. The sky was clear and the stars shone brightly above them. Maria spoke softly, "We have faced many storms, and yet we are here. The land has tested us, and we have proven ourselves." Alana added, "And we have learned that together, we are stronger than any challenge." John nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude for their presence in his life. The summer also brought moments of personal reflection. John often thought about his late wife and the life he had lost. Sometimes, grief returned unexpectedly, and he would sit quietly, letting memories wash over him. Maria and Alana never pressed him to speak, but they offered comfort in small ways: a warm hand on his shoulder, a quiet presence nearby, or a shared smile. Their support reminded him that healing was not a solitary journey, and that it was possible to carry the past while still moving forward. By the end of the summer, the ranch had transformed significantly. The house was repaired, the fences mended, and the fields thriving. John, Maria, and Alana had established routines and traditions that strengthened their bond. They worked together, learned from each other, and celebrated each small victory. The ranch was no longer just a piece of land. It was a living, breathing home, shaped by their hands and their care. The challenges of the land, the weather, and outside opinions had all contributed to their growth. John realized that the struggles he had faced on the ranch mirrored his own journey through grief and loss. Just as the land required patience, care, and resilience, so did life. The women had shown him that even in the harshest conditions, there was beauty, hope, and strength to be found. As summer began to fade into fall, John felt a renewed sense of purpose. He no longer saw the ranch as a place to escape from his past, but as a place to build a future. The women had become family, and together they had created a life filled with trust, respect, and shared responsibility. The ranch, once abandoned and silent, had become a symbol of resilience and unity, a testament to the power of human connection and the healing potential of the land. One cool evening, as the wind swept gently across the fields, John stood on the porch with Maria and Alana. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air carried the faint scent of blooming wildflowers. They watched in silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment and peace. The challenges they had faced together had not only strengthened the ranch but had also strengthened them, individually and as a family. John understood fully that life on the ranch would continue to bring hardships. Storms, heat, and unexpected events were inevitable. But he also knew that with Maria and Alana by his side, they could face anything. Their bond, forged through shared work, respect, and trust, was unbreakable. The ranch was no longer a place of loneliness or grief. It was a home filled with purpose, hope, and love. And so, as the first hints of autumn colored the landscape, John, Maria, and Alana continued their work, their lives intertwined with the land and with each other. The ranch, once abandoned and forgotten, had become a living testament to resilience, courage, and the power of human connection. Together, they had faced storms, both literal and figurative, and emerged stronger. The future remained uncertain, but they faced it with confidence, knowing that whatever came, they would meet it together. Autumn arrived at the ranch, bringing cooler air and the soft rustling of leaves across the fields. The once abandoned property now thrived with life, a testament to the work and care of John McAllister, Maria, and Alana. The house was repaired and painted in warm earth tones, the barn organized and sturdy, and the fields dotted with thriving crops and well-kept gardens. Even the cattle grazed peacefully, reflecting the harmony that had been built over months of shared effort. John stood on the porch one morning, sipping coffee and watching the sun rise over the hills. He felt a sense of calm he had not experienced in years. The grief that had once weighed so heavily on his heart had softened, replaced with a quiet strength and a sense of purpose. Looking out over the land, he realized how far he had come, from a widowed man seeking escape to someone who had found connection, meaning, and a renewed sense of life. Maria appeared in the yard, carrying a basket of freshly harvested vegetables. She smiled, her eyes warm and full of quiet wisdom. "The land is generous this year," she said, placing the basket on the porch railing. "It rewards those who care for it." Alana followed, holding a bundle of dried herbs and flowers. "And it teaches patience," she added softly. "It reminds us that even small efforts matter over time." John nodded, feeling the truth of her words. The ranch had taught them all many lessons: resilience, cooperation, and the rewards of careful attention to both the land and to each other. He realized that the three of them had not only repaired a neglected property, they had built a life together. Life continued in a rhythm that was steady and fulfilling. Mornings were spent tending to the animals and the garden, afternoons in maintenance and repairs, and evenings around the fire, sharing stories, planning for the future, or simply enjoying the peace of the desert. Over time, John came to understand the deeper value of these routines. Each small act of care, each shared task, and each conversation strengthened the bonds between them, creating a home filled not just with objects and structures, but with trust, love, and understanding. One day, as they were preparing the barn for winter, John noticed a hawk circling high above the fields. Its sharp eyes scanned the land below, and its wings cut gracefully through the sky. He felt a sense of awe, remembering Maria's earlier words about the land remembering those who care for it. The hawk seemed a symbol of freedom, strength, and vigilance, a reminder of how far they had all come. "Look at that," John said, pointing toward the bird. "It's magnificent," Maria smiled. "It watches, it protects, and it reminds us to be strong," she said. "We are like the hawk in a way. We watch, we learn, and we survive." Alana added, "And we remember. The land teaches us and we carry its lessons forward." John felt a warmth in his chest. In the months since he had discovered the women living on the ranch, his life had been transformed. He had learned that family was not only those connected by blood, but also those connected by trust, care, and shared experience. Maria and Alana had become his family, and the ranch had become a home in every sense of the word. Winter approached, and with it came new preparations. They worked together to stockpile firewood, secure the barns, and ensure that the animals had enough shelter and food. John found satisfaction in the work, knowing that their efforts would ensure safety and comfort through the harsh months ahead. Maria and Alana moved with confidence, their knowledge of the land and the seasons guiding every decision. One particularly cold evening, after a long day of work, they gathered in the house around the fireplace. The fire crackled and cast a warm glow across the room, illuminating the faces of the three of them. For a while they sat in silence, listening to the wind howl outside and feeling the warmth of the fire within. Then Maria spoke, her voice gentle and steady. "We have faced many challenges together," she said. "Storms, heat, floods, and loneliness. And through it all we have endured. That is something to be proud of." Alana nodded. "We have survived, and more than that, we have thrived. We have built something strong, something lasting." John looked at them, his eyes reflecting gratitude and awe. "I couldn't have done this alone. You both have taught me so much, not just about the land, but about life, trust, and hope. I am grateful every day for your presence." Maria reached over and placed a hand on his. "And we are grateful for you. You have given us safety, respect, and a home. Together, we are stronger than we ever could have been alone." The firelight danced across their faces as they sat together, feeling the quiet satisfaction of their shared accomplishments. The ranch was no longer abandoned. It was alive, filled with laughter, care, and the rhythms of daily life. The walls echoed with memories of hard work and shared stories, and the land itself seemed to hum with energy and gratitude. As the weeks passed, John, Maria, and Alana began to plan for the future. They discussed expanding the garden, repairing the old irrigation system, and perhaps even bringing in a few more animals. Each plan was made with care, keeping in mind the needs of the land and the rhythms of the desert seasons. They celebrated small victories, a crop that flourished, a repaired fence that held through a storm, or the safe arrival of a newborn calf. These moments, though simple, brought deep satisfaction and joy. John also found moments to reflect on his personal growth. He thought about his wife and the life he had lost, and he realized that the pain of that loss had shaped him, teaching him empathy, patience, and resilience. But he also understood that life was not meant to be frozen in grief. The ranch, the women, and the land had given him a second chance, a chance to heal, to build, and to embrace life fully once again. One crisp morning, they worked together to clear the creek of debris, ensuring that water would flow freely to the fields. The work was tiring, but their cooperation made it manageable and even enjoyable. As they labored, John felt a deep sense of connection to the land, to the women, and to the life they were creating together. Every drop of sweat, every careful motion, was part of a larger purpose, a shared journey that had brought them all to this point. Evenings were filled with quiet celebrations. Sometimes they cooked together over the fire, sharing stories and laughter. Sometimes they sat in silence, watching the stars and feeling the peace of the desert night. The ranch had become a place where they could be themselves, free from fear or judgment, a sanctuary built from shared trust and care. As winter deepened, John realized that the journey that had begun with grief and isolation had transformed into something far greater. He was no longer a widowed man running from his past. He was a partner, a protector, and a member of a family that had been chosen by circumstance and solidified by trust. Maria and Alana had become more than companions. They were a part of him, and he of them. The ranch itself reflected this transformation. Where there had once been emptiness and decay, there was now life and structure. The house was warm and inviting, the barns strong and orderly, and the fields productive and cared for. The animals thrived, and even the wild creatures of the desert seemed to recognize the presence of those who tended the land with respect and love. One evening, as the first snow of winter began to fall lightly over the ranch, John stood on the porch with Maria and Alana. The flakes drifted gently, covering the ground in a soft, quiet blanket. He looked out over the fields, the barns, and the hills beyond, feeling a profound sense of peace. "We've come a long way," he said softly. Maria smiled, her eyes reflecting the snow's glow. Yes, we have. And we have done it together. That is what matters. Alana added, the land has accepted us and we have learned to accept ourselves. That is a gift. John felt the weight of the journey behind him, the pain, the struggle, and the growth. But he also felt the lightness of the future, filled with promise, purpose, and hope. The ranch was no longer a place to escape. It was a place to live fully, to nurture, and to belong. As night fell and the snow settled gently over the ranch, John, Maria, and Alana sat together by the fire, feeling warmth not only from the flames but from the bonds they had formed. They had faced storms, loneliness, uncertainty, and fear, and through it all they had emerged stronger, united, and resilient. The ranch had given them a home, and in return they had given it life, care, and love. In that quiet moment, John realized that true home was not just a house or a piece of land. It was the people who shared it, the trust and care between them, and the life they built together. The abandoned ranch that had once seemed empty and lifeless was now a sanctuary, a place of hope, and a testament to human resilience and connection. And so, as the snow continued to fall, covering the land in a peaceful white blanket, John, Maria, and Alana looked out over the ranch, feeling a quiet joy and a sense of accomplishment. The future remained uncertain, as it always does, but they knew that whatever came, they would face it together. The ranch was home, not just a house, not just land, but a living, breathing place filled with love, trust, and the promise of life renewed.